Power doesn't reveal character when everything goes your way. It reveals character when you believe no one can stop you. The steel cables tightened with a sharp metallic groan as the tow truck slowly lifted the black sedan from the curb, its front tires leaving the pavement inch by inch, while dozens of morning commuters instinctively slowed their pace to watch. Some reached for their phones. Others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing there was more to the scene than a routine parking violation. Standing only a few feet away, Monica Carter remained perfectly still. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her arms. She didn't plead. Dressed in a navy blazer over a simple cream blouse, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years walking into courtrooms where emotions solved nothing and facts decided everything. Her leather briefcase rested beside her polished heels as she watched her car disappear higher onto the flatbed. Across the street, Officer Daniel Brooks folded his arms with unmistakable satisfaction. His patrol cruiser sat at an angle beside the flashing amber lights of the tow truck, creating a spectacle impossible to ignore. Daniel wasn't responding to an emergency. He wasn't clearing traffic after an accident. He was making a point. 25 minutes earlier, Monica had calmly questioned why he was issuing a citation to a delivery driver whose emergency flashers had been on for less than 2 minutes while unloading medical supplies for a nearby clinic. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him. She had simply asked whether a warning might accomplish more than another expensive ticket. To Daniel, the question had felt like a challenge. And challenges, in his mind, deserved consequences. Guess next time you'll think twice before telling a police officer how to do his job, he said with a grin that carried farther than he intended. A few nervous chuckles drifted through the gathering crowd before quickly fading into uncomfortable silence. Monica looked toward the tow operator instead of the officer. "Is there any legal reason this vehicle is being removed?" she asked in a calm, measured voice. The driver hesitated. He glanced from Monica to Daniel, then back again. "I'm just following the order, ma'am," he answered quietly. Monica nodded once. "I understand." Her composure puzzled everyone watching. Most people expected anger. Some expected tears. Others waited for a heated argument that would justify staying a few extra minutes before heading to work. Instead, they saw a woman who seemed almost impossibly composed, studying every detail around her. Her eyes lingered briefly on Daniel's badge number, the dashboard camera inside the patrol unit, the license plate of the tow truck, and the security camera mounted above a nearby coffee shop. She wasn't searching for sympathy. She was noticing facts. Daniel mistook her silence for surrender. "You should probably start calling for a ride," he said. Impound lots aren't exactly known for rushing. A young officer standing several yards behind him shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Something about the woman's calmness unsettled him. It wasn't fear he saw in her face. It wasn't defeat either. It looked more like patience. Monica reached into her purse, removed her cell phone, and unlocked it with practiced ease. She didn't rush. She didn't appear flustered. She simply selected a contact and placed the phone against her ear. "Good morning," she said warmly when the call connected. "I'm going to be a few minutes late. Something unexpected has come up downtown." She listened for several seconds before adding only 6 quiet words. "Yes, I think you'll want witnesses." Then she ended the call, slipped the phone back into her purse, and calmly turned her attention toward the tow truck as if the next few minutes would matter far more than anyone standing there could possibly imagine. The tow truck eased forward by a few feet before stopping at the red light, leaving Monica's sedan suspended high enough for everyone on the sidewalk to see. The flashing amber lights reflected against the windows of nearby office buildings, turning an ordinary weekday morning into a scene that attracted more attention with every passing second. The crowd continued to grow. A construction worker carrying a coffee paused beside a newspaper stand. "To law." Students whispered to each other outside the courthouse across the street. A woman walking her golden retriever slowed down long enough to ask someone nearby what had happened. Every answer sounded different because no one actually knew. Daniel Brooks seemed to enjoy the uncertainty. He straightened the front of his uniform, resting one hand near his duty belt while casually watching the reactions around him. To him, appearances mattered almost as much as authority itself. The more people watched, the more convinced he became that he was teaching an important lesson about respecting law enforcement. He never considered that the same audience witnessing his confidence might also become witnesses to something entirely different. Monica quietly stepped closer to the curb, careful not to interfere with the tow operation. She glanced once toward the courthouse clock mounted above the entrance. 9:18 in the morning, right on schedule. Her expression never changed. She carried the same calm presence she had displayed since the first moment Daniel approached her vehicle. The only visible movement came when a light breeze brushed a loose strand of hair across her shoulder. She tucked it back behind her ear and continued observing everything around her. Across the intersection, a young assistant district clerk named Emily Foster emerged from the courthouse carrying a stack of case files. She looked toward the flashing lights with mild curiosity before her eyes settled on Monica. Emily slowed almost immediately. Confusion crossed her face, followed by unmistakable surprise. She instinctively reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and began typing a message with unusual urgency. She did not approach. She simply looked once more toward Monica, received a small reassuring nod in return, and hurried inside the courthouse without saying a word. Daniel never noticed the exchange. His attention remained fixed on the gathering spectators, several of whom had begun quietly recording the incident. One elderly man finally stepped forward. "Officer," he asked politely, "was the car parked illegally?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "The situation has been handled according to procedure." It sounded official enough to discourage further questions, yet it answered nothing. The man looked toward Monica, expecting frustration or protest. Instead, she offered a courteous smile that seemed strangely out of place under the circumstances. "Thank you for asking," she said gently. "Sometimes the full story simply takes a little longer to arrive." Her response lingered in the air long after she finished speaking. Even the tow operator shifted uneasily inside the truck. He had performed hundreds of impounds over the years, but something about this one felt different. There was no panic, no desperate bargaining, no emotional outburst, only patience. Daniel interpreted that patience as defeat. Monica understood it as timing. Less than a minute later, the distant sound of several approaching vehicles echoed through the downtown streets. Their engines blended into the morning traffic at first, almost impossible to distinguish, until one by one they turned onto the same block. Several people instinctively looked toward the intersection. Daniel glanced over his shoulder for only a moment before dismissing them as ordinary government vehicles heading toward the courthouse. He smiled to himself, unaware that the next few minutes would quietly begin changing the direction of everyone standing on that sidewalk. The convoy rolled to a smooth stop along the opposite side of the street, blending almost naturally into the morning traffic except for one detail that immediately caught the attention of the courthouse employees standing outside. Every vehicle carried official county government plates. No flashing lights. No dramatic arrival, just quiet precision. The drivers stepped out one by one, dressed in business attire instead of uniforms, each carrying folders or briefcases as though they were arriving for an ordinary workday. Monica watched them for only a brief moment before returning her attention to the tow truck that still held her sedan above the pavement. Daniel Brooks barely glanced in their direction. Government attorneys, court staff, inspectors, they all passed through downtown every day. Nothing about their arrival seemed important to him. His confidence remained unshaken. He even looked toward the small crowd with a relaxed smile that suggested everything was under complete control. A middle-aged woman standing beside a city bus stop quietly whispered, "She has not argued once." Her husband nodded slowly. Sometimes the calmest person knows the most. Those words floated through the air unnoticed by Daniel, but they lingered with several people nearby. Human instinct often expects outrage when someone is treated unfairly. Monica offered something different. She offered patience. Across the street, Emily Foster reappeared through the courthouse doors, this time accompanied by an older gentleman wearing a charcoal gray suit. His silver hair and measured pace reflected decades of courtroom experience. The moment his eyes landed on Monica, his expression changed from curiosity to concern. Without hesitation, he adjusted his glasses, quietly spoke into his phone, and continued walking toward the sidewalk. Several assistant attorneys followed behind him, each wearing the same expression of growing disbelief. The tow operator noticed them first. He leaned slightly out of the truck window and frowned. "Officer," he said carefully, Looks like some courthouse people are coming over. Daniel shrugged. Probably another group that thinks rules do not apply. The operator did not answer. Something about the approaching officials made him increasingly uncomfortable. They were not rushing. They were not shouting. They moved with the calm confidence of people who already understood the situation better than anyone else present. Monica remained exactly where she had been since ending her phone call. She folded her hands lightly in front of her and offered a polite smile as the older attorney approached. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," he said respectfully. "I apologize that your morning has been interrupted." Monica nodded with quiet warmth. "Good morning, Richard. I appreciate you coming." Daniel's smile faded just enough to notice. He recognized the man immediately. Richard Lawson served as one of the county's senior prosecutors and was well known inside the courthouse. Seeing someone of his position greet Monica so formally planted the first small seed of uncertainty in Daniel's mind. Before he could ask a question, 2 more attorneys crossed the street. Then another. One by one, they acknowledged Monica with the same professional respect. None of them appeared surprised to see her. Instead, they seemed surprised by everything happening around her. The conversations among the spectators grew noticeably quieter. Phones remained raised, but now people were recording for a different reason. Whatever this situation had been a few minutes earlier, it no longer looked like an ordinary vehicle tow. Daniel instinctively straightened his uniform again, searching for an explanation that still allowed the morning to make sense. Yet every passing second made that explanation harder to find. He had expected gratitude from the crowd for enforcing the rules. Instead, he found himself standing alone while nearly every new arrival seemed to recognize the woman whose car still rested on the back of the tow truck. And for the first time since the morning began, Officer Daniel Brooks started wondering whether he had misunderstood exactly who Monica Carter really was. Daniel Brooks forced a confident smile, but it no longer came as naturally as it had only moments earlier. The certainty he had worn like part of his uniform had begun to crack beneath the quiet reactions unfolding around him. Richard Lawson was not simply another attorney passing through the courthouse. Everyone working downtown knew his face. Judges greeted him by name. Prosecutors sought his advice before major hearings. Yet the first thing Richard had done after crossing the street was acknowledge Monica with unmistakable professional respect. Daniel cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Sir, this vehicle was removed under my authority," he said, keeping his voice firm enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "If there is a concern, you can submit it through the proper process." Richard looked at him politely, without showing the slightest sign of irritation. "I appreciate the explanation, officer," he replied. "I believe the proper process is already on its way." Those words settled over the sidewalk. Like a sudden change in the weather. Daniel frowned. What exactly does that mean? Richard simply smiled. "You will understand shortly." Monica remained composed, saying nothing. She allowed the conversation to unfold naturally, never interrupting, never attempting to embarrass anyone. Her silence continued to unsettle the people watching. Most expected someone in her position to celebrate the obvious shift in momentum. Instead, she behaved as though patience still mattered more than victory. Across the street, courthouse employees continued arriving for work. Several recognized Monica immediately. Some offered a respectful nod before entering the building. Others paused briefly, clearly puzzled by the sight of her vehicle resting on the tow truck. Each new reaction deepened the curiosity of the spectators. The young officer standing behind Daniel quietly leaned closer. "Do you know who she is?" he asked under his breath. Daniel answered without looking away from Monica. "She is someone who parked where she should not have." Even as he spoke the words, they sounded less convincing than before. The younger officer glanced toward Richard Lawson, then toward the group of attorneys gathering nearby. "That does not seem to be what everyone else thinks." Daniel ignored him. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, pretending to review the citation while secretly replaying every moment of the encounter in his mind. Monica had never raised her voice. She had never refused an instruction. She had never argued about the law. She had simply asked questions. Calm questions. Reasonable questions. Questions that now echoed differently inside his own thoughts. The tow operator stepped down from the truck and approached cautiously. "Officer, before I leave with the vehicle, are you certain everything is good?" Daniel nodded almost automatically. "Absolutely." The driver hesitated. "I have been doing this job for nearly 20 years. Usually when this many lawyers show up around one toe, something is about to change. Daniel forced a short laugh that convinced no one. You worry too much. Before the driver could answer, another black government sedan turned onto the block and parked directly behind the first group of county vehicles. The conversations around the sidewalk faded almost instantly. Several attorneys straightened their jackets. Richard Lawson checked his watch. Emily Foster quietly stepped aside with an expression that mixed anticipation and relief. Monica looked toward the newly arrived vehicle with the same calm smile she had carried all morning. She did not move forward. She did not wave. She simply waited. Daniel followed everyone's gaze, feeling an unfamiliar knot form in his stomach as the rear passenger door slowly opened, and every person from the courthouse instinctively turned their attention toward whoever was about to step onto the sidewalk. The woman who stepped out of the sedan carried no sense of urgency, only quiet purpose. She was in her late 50s, dressed in a tailored gray suit, with a county identification badge clipped neatly to her jacket. Before she had taken more than 3 steps, Richard Lawson greeted her with a respectful handshake. She nodded briefly, then looked directly at Monica. Good morning, she said warmly. I am sorry your schedule has been interrupted. Monica smiled with the same composed expression she had worn all morning. Good morning, Linda. I appreciate you coming. Daniel watched the exchange carefully. He recognized Linda Pierce immediately. She served as the Chief Administrative Officer for the County Justice Center, someone responsible for overseeing operations across multiple government offices. Seeing her personally arrive over what he believed was an ordinary towing dispute made his confidence weaken even further. Linda glanced toward the tow truck before speaking softly to Monica. Has anything been moved besides the vehicle? Monica answered with complete calm. No, everything else has remained exactly as it happened. Linda nodded once, almost as though she had expected that answer. She turned toward Richard, who quietly handed her a folder. Neither of them appeared interested in arguing with Daniel. Neither raised their voice. They simply observed. That silence began weighing on the entire sidewalk. Even the people recording with their phones sensed that. Something much larger than a parking dispute was unfolding. The tow operator shifted nervously beside his truck. Officer, he said in a careful voice, would you like me to lower the vehicle until everything is sorted out? Daniel immediately shook his head. No, follow the original order. The driver hesitated only briefly before returning to the controls, although his uncertainty was impossible to hide. Nearby, Emily Foster quietly approached Monica with a small envelope. Your briefing materials, she said politely. They were already prepared for this morning. Monica accepted the envelope with a grateful smile. Thank you, Emily. She never opened it. Instead, she held it comfortably at her side while continuing to observe the scene unfolding around her. Daniel noticed the courthouse seal embossed across the front of the envelope. His eyes lingered on it longer than he intended. He suddenly realized that nearly everyone arriving from the courthouse seemed to know Monica personally. Not casually, professionally, respectfully. A reporter carrying a camera emerged from another government building and paused at the edge of the gathering crowd. She spoke quietly with one of the courthouse employees before turning her attention toward Monica. She did not begin filming immediately. Instead, she appeared to be confirming facts first. That detail did not escape Monica's attention. It did, however, escape Daniel's. His focus remained fixed on protecting the decision he had already made. Admitting uncertainty now would mean questioning every confident statement he had delivered in front of dozens of witnesses. Pride quietly replaced judgment. The younger officer standing beside him finally spoke again. Maybe we should call the watch commander. Daniel answered more sharply than intended. There is nothing to report. Yet even as the words left his mouth, another county vehicle approached the curb. This one displayed a small official emblem on its front door that caused several attorneys to straighten their posture almost instantly. Linda Pierce quietly smiled. Richard Lawson closed his folder. Emily stepped respectfully aside. Monica calmly exhaled and adjusted the sleeve of her blazer. Around them, conversations stopped completely. The city noise continued in the background, but on that sidewalk, an almost complete silence settled over everyone present. Daniel looked from one face to another, searching for reassurance, but found only expectation. He still did not know exactly who Monica Carter was, but deep inside, he began realizing that whatever happened next would not simply determine the fate of a towed vehicle. It would determine whether the decisions he had made that morning could withstand the full weight of the truth that was now quietly arriving. The final sedan came to a smooth stop beside the courthouse entrance, and before anyone could speculate further, the driver stepped out and opened the rear passenger door with practiced professionalism. A man in a dark business suit emerged carrying a slim leather portfolio embossed with the seal of the county office of the district attorney. The emblem caught the morning sunlight just long enough for several courthouse employees to recognize it immediately. Conversation stopped. Richard Lawson straightened his posture. Linda Pierce offered a respectful nod. Even the reporter quietly lowered her camera for a moment, sensing that accuracy mattered more than speed. The suited man walked directly toward Monica without hesitation. "Good morning, counselor," he said politely. "The briefing committee is assembled whenever you are ready." Monica smiled. "Thank you, James. I apologize for the unexpected delay." James glanced once toward the tow truck holding Monica's vehicle before returning his attention to her. "Would you like us to proceed after this matter is resolved?" "Yes," Monica answered calmly. "Everyone has already waited long enough." Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. "Counselor." The word echoed louder inside his thoughts than any shouted accusation ever could. He searched the faces around him, hoping someone would dismiss the interaction as a misunderstanding, but instead he saw quiet confirmation everywhere he looked. The attorneys were no longer whispering among themselves. They were waiting. The courthouse staff stood respectfully. Even the tow operator had stopped adjusting the controls and simply watched in silence. Daniel finally stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said carefully, trying to regain control of the situation. "Could someone explain exactly what is happening?" James looked toward him with professional courtesy. "Certainly, officer." He paused briefly before continuing. "You are speaking with Monica Carter." Daniel nodded impatiently. "I know her name." James continued in the same calm tone. "Then you should also know that Ms. Carter serves as the elected district attorney for this county." The words settled across the sidewalk with astonishing stillness. No dramatic music. No raised voices. No celebration. Only silence. The crowd reacted almost instinctively. Several people lowered their phones in disbelief. Others exchanged stunned glances. The elderly man who had questioned the towing earlier slowly removed his hat. Emily Foster quietly looked toward the ground, relieved that the truth no longer needed defending. Daniel stared at Monica, searching her face for any sign of satisfaction or triumph. He found neither. She simply met his eyes with the same composed expression she had carried since the beginning of the morning. Nothing about her demeanor suggested revenge. If anything, she seemed disappointed that such a moment had become necessary at all. Daniel's voice grew noticeably quieter. "You are the district attorney?" Monica answered with gentle professionalism. "Yes." She did not add titles. She did not remind him of the decisions he had made. She simply answered the question. James opened the leather portfolio and removed several documents prepared for the morning meeting. The district attorney was scheduled to address prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement partners regarding accountability, public trust, and ethical decision-making. He paused before adding, "The meeting was set to begin in less than 15 minutes. Daniel slowly looked toward the courthouse steps where dozens of professionals now stood watching. Only then did he fully understand why so many familiar faces had appeared one after another. They had not arrived because of a towing dispute. They had arrived because they had been expecting Monica Carter all along. And standing beneath the quiet weight of every watching eye, Daniel realized that the woman he had dismissed as an ordinary citizen had never needed to announce her authority. Her character had revealed it long before anyone spoke her title. No one spoke for several long seconds. The downtown traffic continued moving through the intersection, horns echoed in the distance, and the courthouse clock quietly marked another passing minute. Yet on that sidewalk it felt as though time itself had paused. Daniel Brooks stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Monica Carter, while everything he believed about the morning slowly unraveled. He had expected anger. He had expected accusations. Instead, Monica offered only calm professionalism. She glanced briefly toward the tow operator before speaking in the same measured tone she had maintained from the beginning. "Sir, I understand you were following an instruction. This situation is not about you." The driver released a breath he had been holding for several minutes. "Thank you, ma'am," he answered quietly. "I truly appreciate that." Monica gave him a reassuring nod before turning her attention back toward Daniel. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only disappointment that respect had been absent from such an ordinary encounter. Richard Lawson stepped forward holding the folder that had remained under his arm throughout the morning. "Officer Brooks," he said politely, "would you mind confirming whether your body camera remained active during your interaction?" Daniel hesitated. "It should have been." Richard nodded once. "Good. That will help establish an accurate timeline." Those simple words carried more weight than any accusation. Accurate timeline. Facts. Documentation. Procedure. The very principles the justice system depended upon. Linda Pierce looked toward the tow operator. "Please lower the vehicle carefully. We will need to document its condition before it leaves this location." "Right away," the driver replied. Within seconds, the hydraulic platform slowly descended. The steel cables loosened, and Monica's sedan gently returned to the pavement. No applause followed. No dramatic celebration erupted from the crowd. The moment felt significant precisely because everyone understood it did not require spectacle. It required accountability. Several courthouse employees quietly began taking photographs of the location, the surrounding traffic signs, the parking markings, and the patrol vehicle. They documented everything with calm efficiency, treating the scene exactly as they would any official matter requiring careful review. Daniel watched silently as each photograph was taken. For the first time that morning, he realized how differently events appeared when every detail mattered equally. The younger officer standing beside him finally spoke with respectful caution. "Sir, perhaps we should notify the watch commander now." Daniel answered after a long pause. "Yes, I think we should." His voice no longer carried the certainty that had defined him earlier. Pride had given way to reflection. Monica waited until the younger officer completed the call before speaking again. "Officer Brooks," she said gently, "my position today is not the important part." Daniel slowly looked up. Monica continued, "The important question is whether this would have happened if you believed I deserved the same respect as every other citizen standing on this sidewalk." No one interrupted. No one attempted to answer for him. Even the spectators remained completely silent. The question belonged only to Daniel. He searched for words, but found none that felt honest enough. Around them, people who had arrived expecting an ordinary workday had witnessed something far more meaningful than a disagreement over a vehicle. They had witnessed how quickly assumptions could shape decisions and how quietly dignity could expose them. Monica picked up her briefcase, smoothed the sleeve of her blazer, and prepared to continue toward the courthouse. She had not raised her voice once. She had not demanded special treatment. She had simply expected the law to be applied with fairness. And as Daniel watched her walk toward the courthouse steps, surrounded by colleagues who respected her not because of her title, but because of her character, he finally understood that the greatest authority in that moment had never come from a badge, an elected office, or a government seal. It had come from the quiet strength of someone who refused to let another person's prejudice decide her dignity. Inside the courthouse, the morning meeting began a few minutes later than planned, but no one complained about the delay. Nearly everyone in the conference room had already heard some version of what had happened outside, although the details varied depending on who had witnessed the scene. Monica Carter walked to the front of the room, carrying the same leather briefcase she had held all morning. She placed it gently on the conference table, looked across the audience of prosecutors, judges, investigators, department supervisors, and law enforcement representatives, then paused before speaking. The room became completely silent. "Thank you all for your patience," she began. "What delayed this meeting has reminded me why today's discussion is more important than ever." No one reached for a phone. No one whispered. Every eye remained focused on her. Daniel Brooks stood quietly near the back beside his watch commander, who had arrived only moments earlier after receiving the younger officer's call. The commander had already spoken briefly with Richard Lawson and Linda Pierce outside. He had reviewed only the basic facts before asking Daniel to accompany him into the meeting. "We are here today to discuss accountability," Monica continued. "Not because accountability is comfortable, but because public trust cannot exist without it." She allowed the sentence to settle before continuing. "This morning, I was reminded that authority can be exercised correctly or carelessly. The difference often begins long before a report is written. It begins with assumptions. Several people slowly nodded. Others lowered their eyes in quiet reflection. Monica never mentioned Daniel by name. She never described the encounter in dramatic terms. Instead, she focused on principles rather than personalities. Every person we meet deserves the same dignity before we know their occupation, education, neighborhood, or title. The law cannot depend upon who someone turns out to be. It must depend upon who we choose to be. Those words echoed through the room with remarkable clarity. Daniel listened without moving. Every sentence seemed directed toward everyone present, yet each one felt deeply personal. After Monica finished her opening remarks, Linda Pierce quietly distributed folders to the department representatives seated around the conference table. Inside were standard review procedures regarding professional conduct, citizen interactions, documentation standards, and interagency accountability. Nothing in the packet had been created because of that morning. These policies had existed for years. The morning had simply reminded everyone why they mattered. Richard Lawson then stood and addressed the room. This incident will be reviewed through the same established procedures applied to every professional concern involving public employees, he said calmly. Facts will be documented. Evidence will be preserved. Conclusions will follow the record rather than assumptions. Again, there was no drama. Only process. Only fairness. Daniel's watch commander quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will cooperate fully," he said in a low voice. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." For the first time since the encounter began, he spoke without defending himself or explaining his decisions. He simply accepted that the process deserved the same respect he expected others to show the law. Monica closed her folder and looked across the room one final time before the meeting moved to its next agenda item. She understood that policies alone could not eliminate prejudice or poor judgment. Rules could guide behavior, but character determined how authority was used when no supervisor was watching. As the discussion continued, the memory of the morning remained with everyone present, not because a district attorney's vehicle had been towed, but because an ordinary interaction had revealed an extraordinary lesson. Respect should never depend upon discovering someone's title after the fact. It should exist from the very first conversation, even when the person standing in front of you appears to be just another face in the crowd. By late afternoon, the courthouse had returned to its familiar rhythm. Attorneys hurried between hearings, clerks organized case files, deputies greeted visitors, and the long lines at the security entrance slowly disappeared. From the outside, it looked like any other workday in the county justice system. Yet for everyone who had witnessed the events that morning, something had quietly changed. The review process began exactly as Richard Lawson had promised. Body camera recordings were secured. Dispatch logs were preserved. The towing authorization was documented alongside witness statements and available public recordings. No shortcuts were taken. No conclusions were rushed. Every step followed the same standards that the justice system expected from every investigation. Daniel Brooks sat inside his supervisor's office answering questions with a level of honesty that had been missing earlier that morning. For the first time, he stopped trying to justify every decision and instead described exactly what had happened from the beginning. When the conversation ended, his watch commander looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "The badge gives us authority," he said quietly. "Character determines whether people trust us with it." Daniel nodded without offering an excuse. He understood that lesson now in a way no policy manual could have taught him. Across town, Monica Carter finished the final meeting of the day before returning to the parking garage where her sedan had been inspected and released without damage. As she unlocked the driver's door, Emily Foster caught up with her carrying the briefing folder from earlier that morning. "May I ask you something?" Emily said. Monica smiled. "Of course." Emily hesitated before speaking. "When you realized he did not know who you were, why did you never tell him?" Monica looked across the garage for a brief moment before answering. "Because the law is supposed to protect every person equally. If someone only chooses respect after learning a title, then they never truly respected the person." Emily quietly absorbed those words. They stayed with her long after Monica drove away. A few days later, courthouse employees still found themselves talking about the incident, but not because of the district attorney's position. They talked about the calm voice that never became angry. They remembered the quiet dignity that never disappeared under pressure. They remembered that the strongest moment of the day had not been the revelation of authority. It had been the decision to answer disrespect with professionalism. Even the people who had watched from the sidewalk carried the memory with them. The construction worker mentioned the story during lunch with his crew. The elderly man told his grandchildren about the importance of treating strangers fairly. The tow operator reminded his coworkers that every assignment deserved careful judgment because no one ever truly knew the story behind the person standing in front of them. Weeks later, Daniel walked through the same downtown streets where everything had begun. The buildings had not changed. The traffic sounded the same. The courthouse still stood at the end of the block. Yet every time he passed the curb where Monica's vehicle had once been lifted onto the tow truck, he remembered the question she had asked without anger or accusation. Would this have happened if you believed I deserved the same respect as every other citizen? It was a question that followed him far beyond that single morning because it reached deeper than one encounter. It challenged every assumption made before listening, every judgment formed before understanding, and every decision influenced by appearance instead of fairness. In the end, the most powerful lesson was never about a badge, a courtroom, or an elected office. It was about remembering that dignity should never be earned through status. It should be given freely because justice begins long before a verdict is reached. Some people believe authority is measured by the power to control another person's day. Real authority is measured by the wisdom to treat every person with fairness before you ever learn who they are.